There is growing anti-China sentiment, particularly by its neighboring countries. This is mostly due to China's expanding territorial claims, the militarization of its surrounding seas predominantly in the West Philippine Sea, and China's action toward Taiwan enforcing its One China policy. Most of these countries and territories in the region that are against China's belligerent actions are mostly, if not all, allies of the United States. China's efforts to bully its neighbors into assenting to its demands and preferences have failed and led Asia's democracies to deepen security cooperation with the United States. Today, China's biggest concern is the presence of the United States in the region. The U.S. government does not only influence East and Southeast Asia through its economic and social cooperation but mostly due to the presence of the military bases that surround China to counter Chinese aggressions in the Pacific. China's economic dominance in the region has failed its neighbors to deepen security alliance. Instead, Xi Jinping's government become a security threat to most countries in the region from South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, to the Philippines and even as far as Australia in the Southern Hemisphere. China has been hated most by its neighbors due primarily to its expanding territorial claims and its military aggression towards other claimants in the disputed areas. Its aggressive and bullying techniques make its neighboring claimants extend security cooperation with the United States and its allies. The sovereignty of the Philippines was the first Asian country to be directly affected by China's territorial expansion and militarization in the South China Sea. China claims almost entirely of the West Philippine Sea, an area rich in natural resources and holds trillions of cubic feet of natural gas and billion barrels of oil reserves and deposits. As a dominant state that wields considerable influence in the economy and security of many countries, China seems to have assumed that vulnerable states, such as the Philippines, would tolerate its belligerent actions. China had lost sight that the Philippines, like many ASEAN countries, is a post-colonial state, sensitive to the raw ambition of superpowers to dominate and bend them against their will. To counter Chinese aggression in the South China Sea, the Philippines, with lesser economic influence and military power, opened up additional U.S. military bases in the country. As the longest U.S. ally in the region, the Philippines has long been at the forefront of preserving the free and open regional order in Southeast Asia and the greater Indo-Pacific region with the help of U.S. military might. The Mutual Defense Treaty between the Republic of the Philippines and the United States of America, signed in 1951, serves as a foundation for the close security cooperation between the two countries. The alliance continues to thrive in the ever-evolving security environment that surrounds the Philippines. The U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty evolved into the 1998 Visiting Forces Agreement, VFA, and the 2014 Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA. The Mutual Defense Treaty will give access to the United States to increase its military presence in the region, gaining additional control over more sites and strengthening the Southeast Asian nation's role as a key strategic partner for Washington in the event of a conflict with China over Taiwan. The deal comes as Washington has tried to reaffirm its influence in the region amid a broader effort to counter Chinese aggression, reinforcing partnerships with strategic allies and bolstering relations that have soured in recent years. Fears have also grown over a possible Chinese invasion of Taiwan, the island democracy that China claims as its territory. Among the 5 treaty allies that the United States has in Asia, the Philippines and Japan are the most geographically close to Taiwan, with the Philippines' northernmost inhabited island of Itbayat just 93 miles away. Having increased U.S. access in northern Luzon, the closest Philippine island to Taiwan, really ensured that the Philippines and the U.S. alliance are going to have a front and center role in Northeast Asian security and deterrence. The Philippines archipelago is also a major part of the first island chain, which refers to the first chain of major Pacific archipelagos out from the East Asian continental mainland coast. Currently, the first island chain is the most effective point to counter any Chinese invasion and expanding influence. Beyond the U.S., the Philippines and Japan recently agreed to deepen defense ties, with Japan beefing up its military base near Taiwan. Japan Defense Ministry began construction of a new self-defense forces base on Magashima Island on January 12 as part of a controversial plan to relocate a U.S. military aircraft training site. Magashima Island will become the nearest U.S. military base in Japan to Taiwan, more than 1,000 kilometers away. Magashima Island became a candidate site for the relocation of the U.S. military's field carrier landing practices, which are currently conducted on Iwoto Island. The ministry began dredging last year to deepen the sea bottom around the port. It has also been constructing the roads that run alongside the island's coast. The assessment calls for an 8,000-foot main runway, a 6,000-foot crosswind runway, a port, and ammunition and fuel storage facilities. The runways and storage facilities will be built first. U.S. military forces are dispersed among 85 facilities across Japan located in Honshu, Kyushu, and Okinawa. The total acreage of U.S. bases is approximately 77,000 acres. Japan also has territorial disputes with China. The Senkaku Islands territorial dispute over a group of uninhabited islands known as the Senkaku Islands in Japan and the Diaoyu Islands in the People's Republic of China. The disputed islands are surrounded by rich fishing grounds and undersea oil deposits, and Japan accuses China of suddenly making its territorial claims after the undersea resources were found in a 1969 United Nations report. The 1972 Normalization Communique did not deal with the issue, but the dispute intensified after Japan's government in 2012 nationalized the Senkaku Islands, leading to violent protests across China. Japan, along with its security ally the United States, has openly criticized increased Chinese activities in the South China Sea. Tokyo has also pushed for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Anti-China sentiment appears to be running high in South Korea. Anti-China attitudes among South Koreans have been building up over time due to diplomatic incidents tied to deeper cultural and societal anxieties. South Korea is no stranger to walking the tightrope between the United States and China. In terms of foreign policy, South Korea is determined to remain close to the United States defensively while maintaining its close economic relationship with China. Following the South Korean president's efforts to reset relations with Japan earlier this year, the door to deeper trilateral cooperation between South Korea, Japan, and the United States has also opened. At the Camp David summit on August 18, the leaders of the three countries laid out a vision for deeper trilateral cooperation in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. This concerns China of losing another neighboring ally and joining the alliances with the United States. The main objective of the Camp David summit was to institutionalize cooperation among South Korea, Japan, and the United States to endure future periods of tension. The Camp David agreements constitute a significant step for South Korea. The spirit of Camp David document commits the three countries to seek alignment in their objectives and their actions. In recent decades, South Korea has largely followed a strategy of looking to China as an economic partner and the United States as a security partner. The new agreements begin to move South Korea away from that model as it deepens cooperation with the United States and Japan on economic security, supply chain resilience, and technology. One could argue that this was happening with or without the Camp David agreements. Taiwan, officially known as the Republic of China, is an island separated from China by the Taiwan Strait. It has been governed independently of mainland China, officially the People's Republic of China, since 1949. China views the island as a renegade province and vows to eventually unify Taiwan with the mainland. In Taiwan, which has its own democratically elected government and is home to 23 million people, political leaders have differing views on the island's status and relations with the mainland. Cross-strait tensions have escalated since the election of Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen in 2016. Tsai has refused to accept a formula that her predecessor endorsed to allow for increased cross-strait ties. Meanwhile, Beijing has taken increasingly aggressive actions, including flying fighter jets near the island. Some analysts fear a Chinese attack on Taiwan has the potential to draw the United States into a war with China. Beijing asserts that there is only one China and that Taiwan is part of it. It views the PRC as the only legitimate government of China, an approach it calls the One China principle, and seeks Taiwan's eventual unification with the mainland. A top concern among U.S. analysts is that China's growing military capabilities and assertiveness, as well as the deterioration in cross-strait relations, could spark a conflict. Such a conflict has the potential to lead to a U.S.-China confrontation. That's because China hasn't ruled out using force to achieve Taiwan's reunification, and the United States hasn't ruled out defending Taiwan if China attacks. The U.S. Department of Defense said in a 2021 report that China's military, the People's Liberation Army, PLA, is likely preparing for a contingency to unify Taiwan with the PRC by force, while simultaneously deterring, delaying, or denying any third-party intervention, such as the United States. China has employed a variety of coercive tactics short of armed conflict, and it has ramped up these measures since Tsai's election in 2016. Its objective is to wear down Taiwan and prompt the island's people to conclude that their best option is unification with the mainland. To that end, China has increased the frequency and scale of patrols of PLA bombers, fighter jets, and surveillance aircraft over and around Taiwan. It has also increasingly sailed its warships and aircraft carriers through the Taiwan Strait in shows of force. Australia's government has cooled things down with Beijing, at least for now. But while the relationship may be less heated, beneath the surface it is no less contentious. China turned fiercely against Australia after a call for an investigation into COVID-19's origins in April 2020 by then Prime Minister Scott Morrison. The relationship reached its nadir later that year when the now infamous list of 14 Chinese grievances, which included Australia's banning of Huawei from its 5G network, restrictions on Chinese ownership in critical Australian infrastructure, foreign interference laws, and Australia's ongoing support of a free press, was posted by the Chinese embassy in Canberra as the rationale for a sweeping series of sanctions on Australian exports. Meanwhile, China is continuing its efforts to establish a military base in the Solomon Islands through security agreements. Given that Imperial Japan invaded the Solomons in 1942 to strategically choke continental Australia, Australia can assume that Chinese President Xi Jinping hasn't chosen the idyllic islands for their holiday potential. And though China's attempts to form a wider regional security agreement were rebuffed by members of the Pacific Islands Forum, it hasn't given up on the vision of having Chinese military vessels patrolling Australia's shores. In February 2022, a Chinese Navy vessel directed a laser at an Australian military aircraft in flight over Australia's northern approaches, illuminating the plane and potentially endangering lives, according to Australia's Defence Ministry. AP-8A Poseidon, a maritime patrol aircraft, detected a laser emanating from a People's Liberation Army Navy. The Chinese vessel was sailing east with another PLAN ship through the Arafura Sea at the time of the incident, the department said. The sea lies between the north coast of Australia and the south coast of New Guinea. Differences over Taiwan's status and Chinese aggression in South China have fueled rising tensions between China and the United States and its allied countries. Taiwan and the South China Sea have the potential to be a flashpoint in U.S.-China relations. Fears of a U.S.-China war has further been stoked by Beijing turning more hostile in its territorial disputes with the Philippines and Japan in the South China Sea, and increasing cross-strait tension after Taiwan re-elected the Democratic Progressive Party earlier this year. The United States Navy has released documents outlining its goals for meeting the growing threat of Chinese military power in the coming years. The Navigation Plan for America's Warfighting Navy, published last week, is designed to bring the Navy into a stronger position against the People's Liberation Army by 2027 via bolstered recruitment and strategic technological advancement. This navigation plan drives toward two strategic ends: readiness for the possibility of war with the People's Republic of China by 2027, and enhancing the Navy's long-term advantage. The 2027 deadline for Navy modernization relates to Chinese President Xi Jinping's stated goal of preparing the PLA for an invasion of Taiwan by 2030. The U.S. Navy has outlined a 7-target plan to boost its readiness for war by 2027, with its eye on China as Beijing ramps up its own military strength, turning more hostile in its territorial disputes with the Philippines, and the possibility of a Taiwan invasion looms. As part of the United States' deterrence strategy against China, aside from boosting its Navy, the United States also strengthened its interoperability with its allies in Indo-Pacific. The U.S. has been amassing a variety of anti-ship weapons in Asia, as Washington attempts to catch up quickly in an Indo-Pacific missile race in which China has a big lead. Although the U.S. military has declined to say how many will be deployed in the Indo-Pacific region, more than 800 SM-6 missiles are due to be bought in the next 5 years, according to government documents outlining military purchases. Several thousand Tomahawks are already in U.S. inventories, the documents showed.